Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not To Comic Book. This being a show where it's about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of WandaVision. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Obviously, we've had another shift in the sitcom era, and now we're kind of, early to mid-2000s. What I thought was interesting, because obviously it's a sitcom that doesn't have any laughing. It's kind of like a Malcolm in the Middle, if you want to go Disney-wise. Even though I've never seen this, I'd say it'd be very, Life with Derek. It's kind of like that. Because I know Disney's had a few of those where there is no laughing with them. Obviously, it's a, Modern Family. Because I forgot that technically that would be under the Disney umbrella because that's an ABC show. I think The Middle was an ABC show too. So it fits in that same vein as well. So it's stuff like that. So that was interesting, but also I think it definitely has that Malcolm in the Middle, because Malcolm would talk to the audience, talk to the camera that was there. He kind of did that, and Billy is the one that does that, which I thought was kind of interesting. But obviously it was just an interesting setup, interesting opening and stuff like that. I thought that was pretty dope. But obviously Pietro being there, and obviously Wanda coming down. We saw this in the trailer, her dressed up as, how Scarlet Witch dresses in the, her superhero outfit in the comic books. Obviously Vision looking a little bit more like Vision from the comic books as well. But it was interesting, and it's it's kind of like a fun thing of having the cool uncle around and everything. Obviously they're kind of a little nervous around him because it's obviously they don't know too much about him. It's he was going away for so long and now he's just here. But what's interesting is Vision's he's decided hey, I'm gonna go, neighborhood watch to keep an eye on things, and she's like, whoa. And then Wanda says, no, what? That's not what you're supposed to. And he's like, huh? And she stops. It's because she was about to say, that's not what you're supposed to do. That you're supposed to be doing. But it's these are the kids' first Halloween. But you can tell there's because I was we're completely skipping over you guys being at odds last episode, but it's still there. I think Vision is trying to keep up a front of trying to keep her calm. Because even at one point before he leaves, he goes, hey, be good, so. And even Wanda's catching on to it. He's trying to be subtle about it, but it's definitely there. I even thought it was interesting because Pietro's no, don't worry. There's a guy here with an XY chromosome. Obviously, they're just guy, X, chromosome, X, man. Obviously, it's meant to be hey, there's another male in here, but it's they're winking to it, and it's okay. So there's that. Just kind of let's go ahead through a little bit more of the Westview stuff. Obviously, Pietro kind of dressing up like Quicksilver from the comic books. Even Tommy being dressed like that. I even love him at one point being calling Billy. He's like, no, I'm Tommy. He's and don't you forget it. But kind of having fun with the whole situation. Out celebrating, it's Halloween time and stuff like that. Obviously, Pietro's kind of doing his thing in public and stuff like that. And obviously, at one point, Wanda's asking her, oh, what's going on? And he's wait, this is happening? Oh, this is happening? Oh, this is happening. He's oh, obviously Pietro and the kids are causing mischief. And then she's she finds out wait, Vision's not with you. She's I thought he was. He's is there anything you want me to do? It's not as scary as do you want me to take that from the top from last episode? But it's happening more and more. She's no, it's okay. He's okay, well, see you, Wanda. Just kind of goes back into the flow of things. And the one with Agnes last episode was a lot scarier and creepier. You want me to take from the top? This time it's just kind of no, you go right back to it. So I was okay. And even at one point I thought was kind of fascinating. She's talking with Pietro, and it's why do you look different? And he realizes he looks different. So he's if I were you, if I found Shangri-La, I wouldn't want to think about basically had the past thrown back at me. And I was so you are aware of what's going on here. He admits he is the same Pietro of the MCU, the one that's played by Aaron Taylor Johnson. He is the same Pietro. He just looks like Evan Peters. So that was so interesting. So it's not necessarily a multiverse thing. It is just like, I think it's just supposed to be like I think it's just Disney being cheeky, just being like, hey, we got Quicksilver playing Quicksilver, but this is it's the same Quicksilver from the MCU. This isn't the X-Men MCU. I mean, this isn't the X-Men Quicksilver played by Evan Peters. We're just using him to play this just because, to get you thinking like, multiverse stuff, is that what's happening here? It's like, no, that's still the same Pietro. I think it's just, like I said, I think it's just Disney and just everyone behind WandaVision just being cheeky. I think that's what that really is. But because he gets very like existential in this episode. Well, because he talks about the fact is the last thing he remembers is getting shot, and then he's like, I heard your voice and you needed me, so he showed up. He even kind of hints like why I'm here. I'm here to cause some disruptions in your marriage, and like the kids, get a little kid out with the kids. That's what you brought me here for. So it is that thing of like, he's a representation of her subconscious. It's like she needed something to kind of, because her vision, it was the back and forth, and it was like, it was getting too much, kind of, considering what's going on, like not properly dealing with her grief. That was her deflecting from like those hard conversations about what's going on. So subconsciously she created something to kind of deflect from all that and enter Pietro, but obviously make him a little different, because if you saw his actual face, it probably would have just been too much. So it's like, I need him, but I also need him to not look exactly the same. Maybe the argument could be because she saw Vision dead, like after Thanos like ripped the stone out, like maybe having seen that, maybe it made her terrified to get the real version of her brother, because at one point she turns over to him, he's dead with the bullet wounds in him, so reality creeping in little by little. But even he kind of hints at some really interesting stuff where he was talking about the fact is that what he thought was like, he was saying like, he's like, where were you hiding all these kids? Like, were they in their bed sleep or something like that? Because it's like, up till now, Billy and Tommy were like the only kids we really saw in Westview. We only just mainly saw the adults. But it's like, he's like, I'm sure like busting them out for a holiday cameo is just, enough not to cause any like psychological damage. He's like, nah, like I get it. He's like, I support it, because he's like, look at everything that's going on. Like, you kept a lot of the same people together. So people who are couples in this universe, they were actually couples in the outside world too. It's just you might have changed some of the names and stuff, but a lot of the couples and stuff like that, you kept, and families, you kept them together. You might have actually, given them like new jobs, better jobs even. So he's saying like in certain regards, it's like, it's not as bad as people. I think it's he's her subconscious kind of manifested, so he's trying to make her feel better by it, by being like, hey, you're not doing something terrible, because you actually, these people, it's not like you tore these families apart, you kept them together, you actually made their lives better because you gave them even better jobs. And she's like, so you don't think what I'm doing is bad? Because that's what Vision kept bringing up last episode, what she was doing is bad. Because Pietro's mainly there to be her yes man. Like, he's there to make her, like I said, that's her subconscious trying to make her feel better. She's trying to justify what she's doing to herself, But she keeps trying to almost hint like, no, I didn't do it. So it does seem like maybe it's still that flipping back and forth, because I think this is happening to everyone that's watching the show. Because some people are like, Wanda did it. But other people are like, no, maybe there's someone else. It does still seem like there's someone else, but it does seem like a lot of this is on Wanda. Or at the very least, someone is making Wanda feel like this is all on her, when in actuality, she's not as in control as she thinks she is. Who's the puppeteer puppeteering her? We don't know. But it was just interesting in that moment, like I said, just trying to like justify herself. No, I'm good. I'm not hurting these people. It's fine, which obviously we know it's not fine. But because obviously, we'll circle back to it. Let's really quickly kind of take everything outside. Obviously, Monica, Jimmy, and Darcy are, Hayward is kind of like, all right, the jet is still covered in the energy from being inside Westview, or maybe it's in particular from Wanda Touch, because it is interesting, because you make a Darcy brings up a point later on that obviously Monica's DNA has changed because she's going in and she's out crossing that barrier twice, did something to her. Maybe the same thing happened to, granted, she's a human being, so obviously maybe it works a little differently, but obviously we see that with that drone, because it went in and it came out, so. But obviously Hayward is kind of being like, she's a threat. like we'll take her on, but it's like we don't want to go to war with Wanda. Like we will lose that. Like Monica's trying to like say like let's talk to her. Like if we get aggressive with her, she's going to get aggressive with us. But even turning towards Darcy and be like, do you work here? And he goes, do you work for me? And she's like, actually, I don't actually know. I don't really have the answer to that. And it's like, she's with me. And it's like, oh, which one of you is the sassy one? And Jimmy's like, oh, don't talk down to your people who are working for you like that. But he's not willing to listen to them anymore. He even going after Monica, being like, hey, you've been like, you're always a little sympathetic when it comes to people with powers. He's like, I know about your circumstances with Carol Danvers. And it's like, once again, I think because of last episode, which I'm still like, dude, what was that look about? What is it about between you and Carol? I threw out my thoughts about it. Other people throwing out their theories as well as what that look could have been about. But I'm sure bringing Carol up wasn't too... I'm sure she didn't appreciate it. But also like him throwing salt on the wound by bringing up her... It led to an interesting conversation because he's talking about the fact is like, you guys had the luxury of disappearing and coming back, so you're a little more optimistic about this whole hero thing, which I'm like, is that supposed... I mean, I guess it's for them, it's like, because for one, it's like, you guys failed. Literally, not just Earth, the entire universe, half of it got wiped away. You guys are supposed to be the heroes. Earth's mightiest. You failed. Yeah, you brought everybody back, but it didn't take away those 5 years. He was like, those 5 years like were a lot to go through. You guys had the luxury of being optimistic because you didn't have to live in this world where half the population just disappeared and we never knew if you guys were going to come back or not. If you were dead or what have you. You know, so for him, it's like we did whatever we had to keep the lights on. And obviously for Monica, it's like, don't use that as an excuse to be a coward. And I think I take that as like that you're letting your hardened situation control you in this situation. Just take time to like figure this out. But even him being like I said, throwing Maria in her face, like, because it's kind of like, oh, it's a good thing your mom's not around to see you like this, because you're too soft for what needs to be done, and kind of kicks them all out. But obviously they have their own plans because they're looking into what's up with Hayward, and it seems like he's keeping it's like, oh, he has a view into West view because of Vision, and it's like, why is that? Why is he, and why hasn't he said anything to anyone about this? So that begs the question, like, I guess Vision's supposed to be their inside source, their inside man to a certain extent, but it's like, for what purposes? Like, obviously it's the conversation a lot of people have had about like how he's it's like Vision didn't want to be used as a weapon, but it's like, lo and behold, you were testing and experimenting on him, so there's some level of this of like you weaponizing him. Maybe it's because, I mean, I'm sure humanity's probably had to deal with that of like 5 years without other people, you probably crossed certain lines maybe you wouldn't have crossed in the past, just because it's like we're dealing with galactic threats. Like Thanos was a threat like no one before. Yes, the New York incident was, yes. Ultron, yes. Nothing struck Earth the way Thanos did. Nothing struck the universe like Thanos did. So I think that puts things in a whole new perspective. And like I said, you're probably willing to cross lines like you might not have done before. So it's like, whatever it means, what do we have to do? Like I said, to keep the lights on, then we'll do it. We don't know what lines. I mean, we know a little bit of like what Clint did. Like, he kind of went the whole full Ronin. Like, what that necessarily entails, maybe we'll find out more about that in the Hawkeye series. Maybe not. Maybe they won't dabble on tackle that at all. We don't know. But at the very least, like, it's an experience that changes people, for better or for worse. So that was just kind of an interesting thing. But then back in Westview, a lot of interesting things. For one, Billy and Tommy awaken to their abilities. Tommy does it first, so he's a speedster like his uncle. So that was interesting. And, Wanda even made a point to be like, don't go. And they're like, yeah, Alice Avenue, like, don't go that far. Yeah. So that was interesting. What I also thought was fascinating, like, I couldn't tell, like, the way Billy was dressed. I was like, are you supposed to be like Doctor Strange, or are you supposed to be like Magneto? Just because of like the headband made me think a little Magneto. Is that supposed to be kind of like his helmet? But the cape and everything made me go, that could be either Doctor Strange or Magneto with the red cape. But I was curious about that. But nevertheless, But then focusing on what's going on with Vision, he goes to the other side of town, and then that's where it seems like some of the glitching is a little bit worse, because we see like this, he sees this particular couple, them kind of repeating the same thing over and over again. The wife hanging up the sheet or whatever, you see like a single tear dropping down the side of her face. And then he goes further and further, and he starts heading down that direction where Wanda was like telling the kids to stay away from Ellis Ave. And on that side of town, because even Darcy notices, like, why? It almost seems they had noticed, like, oh, it seems like no one's moving here. And he goes there, everyone is frozen. He's trying to interact with people, but I guess it's like the main, like, I think it's processing power. All the processing power is dedicated to the main parts of town. So like outside of that, the story is just kind of dead, where it's just like, okay, unless it might be that type of thing when you think about with a TV show, unless, like, it makes you wonder, like, in between a TV show, like, you know, Family Guy made a joke about it where it's like, and they do a cutaway and then like everyone's on their phone or smoking or whatever. It's kind of like that to a certain extent. When the show isn't there focusing on the stories on that side of town or whatever, maybe to save processing power, those people are just shut down. It's like, you're not important to the story, so you're literally on standby, and then the moment we need you for the story, or like I was saying, in general, maybe just there isn't enough processing power going around, so it just naturally has to be sucked away from that side of town and just put into this side. Who knows? But Vision, you know, it's dead quiet. It's so creepy and eerie. Lo and behold, where does he runs into? Well, first he flies into the air, and then you hear all the screaming, all the excitement on this side of town, and as he turns around, it just grows dead silent. It's like, that's creepy, because who knows how many people are on that side of town that are just kind of shut down. It's like, the fuck is that? And for them, obviously, they're on some level, they are aware, because like I said, the lady who was doing hanging up the sheet. Tear, like she was almost like she was probably screaming like, oh my god, someone help me on the inside, but couldn't verbally say it. But lo and behold, who does he run into? He runs into Agnes, and she's like, oh, I must have taken the wrong turn. And he's trying, and he wakes her up, and she's like, oh my god, you're Vision, you're an Avenger. And he's like, what's an Avenger? And it's like, oh boy, because it didn't cross my mind to think about it, but it makes sense. He's like, he doesn't remember anything prior to Westview. And I was watching Fat Man Beyond last week, and obviously they were talking about the episode 5 at the time. But Mark Bernard brought up something I didn't even think about, because I was like, holy shit, how did it never cross my mind to think about it? Yes, Vision doesn't remember anything before Westview anyway, but it's so interesting to think about. Mark pointed out the detail of, like, he was making another point, but like, that Tony's dead. Granted, he doesn't even know who Tony is, but it's like, I was like, holy shit, I didn't even think about that. Because Vision died years before Tony did. Hell, Tony died a couple weeks ago at the time, like, in this time frame. It's only been a couple weeks since he died. So, like, Vision doesn't know. Like, even when he gets his memories back, it's gonna be like, wait, the guy who made me, who's a father to me? Because, yes, him and Bruce are kind of like his fathers, but more so Tony, because, you know, Jarvis is, you know, kind of there with him at the beginning of it, but for him to be like, to find out his father died, sacrificing himself to bring everybody back. Well, not just to bring, actually both his fathers actually sacrificed. Obviously, like, Bruce did the first snap that brought everyone back. That fucked him up. And then, like, you had Tony sacrificing himself to kill Thanos and his entire crew. So it's something interesting to, you know, think about. Like, it put certain things in your head, like, oh, that's interesting. But it's also showing, like, he doesn't, like, Wanda made sure to wipe away his memories of everything, because I think she didn't want any little memories to send off the synapses in his head, because your mind works like that, where one memory can lead to another, and it could be a domino effect. So she wiped everything clean, because it's like, yeah, there was good that came with being Avengers, because they found each other because of being Avengers, but also being an Avenger tore them apart. It caused so much complication. They lost so much. She lost Vision because they were Avengers, because he had an Infinity Stone and put him in Thanos' path. So there's that. But her being like, wait, because even she's confused, like, wait, you don't know? It's like, he's like, oh, get us out of here. She's like, that's not going to happen. No one ever gets to leave. Wanda, and she specifically said, Wanda doesn't even let anyone think of leaving. And I'm like, okay. Because prior to now, I pointed it out, they've always referred to as she. So it's like, okay, you think it's Wanda. I think it's fascinating that Agnes is the only person to ever call Wanda out by name in that regard, of being like, Wanda, won't let us even think about it. So that makes me, like I said, I'm still suspicious of her, but I'm like, could it be that Agnes is once again trying to point the finger, like drive this wedge, drive Wanda even more insane by making her think she has all this control, and then slowly but surely chip away at that control. So she, maybe there's moments of her flexing that have control, but it's like only because someone allows her to have control in those moments. Because even her brother asked her, like, how did you manage to do all this? And she was like, honestly, I don't know. She's like, I don't remember. I was in this endless, bottomless, like, pain. And then that's all she really remembers. Just so her memories only go up to a certain extent because she doesn't know how this even all happened. But what was really fascinating, obviously, is Vision crossing town, making his way literally through the barrier, and he struggled to get through, which I think is interesting because I wonder, is it the modification she made to the barrier when she went back in, or would this same thing have happened to Vision prior to now? So it might be a series of events of Hayward's action made this whole situation even harder for Vision, or maybe not. Like maybe it still would have been just as hard, but as he's going through, literally pieces of him are kind of flying off, which I think is so interesting because nothing else that's part of that world that comes out on the out, like whatever was changed from going from outside to in, nothing that ever does that going out, like Monica's clothes, the drone, there's this energy in them, but they still remained intact to a certain extent. Maybe on a molecular level, there's something going on there with them. Obviously, we see that with Monica, but it makes you wonder, why was it specifically affecting him that way? Is it because whatever his situation is, he was made in Westview, so things specifically from Westview, from the Hex, break apart? Because he was literally breaking apart, and it looks like the pieces of him were kind of flying back. So I don't know whether, it seemed like the Hex was literally trying to pull him and yank him back, even if it meant breaking him apart, but it was killing him in the process. So that's why I'm like, maybe he's kind of reverting back to, because the clothes didn't revert back to the original state outside of Westview. Makes it, because what I'm curious about, like, obviously it's supposed to fit the era, because we saw the drone that went in beforehand, the one that was supposed to attack Wanda, it stayed mainly intact because it was something of that era, that the sitcom era that they were in at the time. So part of me was wondering if the clothes Monica was wearing as Geraldine, obviously that was her Kevlar. Obviously we know that now, but it's like, if that would the rules have applied while she was in Westview, because they're meant to be just regular clothes. She changed the reality of it, but they were still them underneath. So I'm wondering, like, that applied on the outside, but did that apply on the inside? Would have still been Kevlar, or would the reality warping have made it be like, oh, it's supposed to be this in this reality, that's all it is? So that's why I'm wondering, like, maybe like Vision, maybe it kind of applies in that case where, like, things keep their shape when they leave, but their integral structure of what they are stays the same. So, like, maybe, I don't know, I'm confusing myself, and I'm confusing this the more I'm going on, but it's just something, a lot to wrap your head around, to think about, like, what that necessarily meant for Vision. Is it because he's dead in this reality, and, like, the moment he's coming out, like, basically his body's, like, shifting between, like, oh, you're dead, you're alive, you're dead, you're alive, and that's what was kind of pulling him apart? Or is it just because he left without Wanda's permission? Because anything else that came out is because Wanda dragged the drone out, she threw Monica out. So, but what was interesting is, in that moment, Billy's powers activate, and he becomes, like, I think he adopted Wanda's abilities, where he stops Tommy, and then it's like, I can hear Dad, and in that moment, and, like, oh, Pietro, it's like, oh, like, it's not like they could kill your husband again. That instantly sent, like, Wanda into a rage. She blasted him. It's like, that's your brother, but it's like, you're not gonna, it's like, I think that kind of shows you the hierarchy in that situation, because it's like, you don't look like my brother, and it's like, I think maybe on some subconscious level she realizes, you're not my brother at all. You're just my subconscious manifest saying what I want you to say. But whatever the case may be, she hunkered down and expands the Hex. Like, which is also interesting. I mean, to be fair, you made the Hex. We've seen that you can alter it last episode, so being able to expand it shouldn't be too much of a surprise. But obviously, she expands it, and everything and everyone gets sucked into it. I thought it was kind of interesting that all the FBI, the agents there, the sword agents, all got turned into, like, mimes and clowns. I thought that maybe because in her mind, that's how she sees them, as these little, like, kind of a joke in a certain extent. But luckily, Hayward was luckily able to get out with at least 2 of his agents. Everyone else got sucked into it, including Darcy. Because even Darcy was like, why aren't you helping him? Like, can't you tell he's in pain? Because I think for them, it's like they probably were waiting for Vision to die because they probably wanted to see what would happen. But also they were probably going to take the pieces, whatever was left of his husk, and just examine it. But Vision got pulled back into the expanding hex. So it's going to be interesting to see what that looks like. Which is also fascinating because let's not forget, she was on I'm curious if they play with that at all, because she was on a sitcom too, Two Broke Girls. So I'm curious if they'll even play with that at all. Maybe, maybe not. But obviously Jimmy and Monica were leaving to meet up with her guy, which obviously a lot of people have their speculations on who that could be. A big running theory is Reed Richards. Now, whether that ends up being the case or not, it's going to be interesting. I'm assuming we'll get the answer to that potentially next episode. But, yeah. That, like I said, a lot of interesting things. A lot of stuff to keep in mind. I'm so curious to see where we go. There are 3 episodes left now. And it's like, wow, we're nearing the end already. And things just keep escalating. So I'm curious what's next. I mean, are we done with the Pietro situation? Like, are we done with that? Or, like, I mean, she blasted him back, like, but what will that manifest as anything? I should also note there was a line I thought was interesting. He was like, okay, let's go, kick some ass. And they're like, oh, let's go. And then she says, kick ass. I was like, was that supposed to be a wink and a nod? To anyone that doesn't realize or remember, the MCU's Quicksilver, Aaron Taylor Johnson, played Kick-Ass in the movie Kick-Ass. Oh, and Kick-Ass 2. So I don't know whether, like, the fact that they made such a point to that, it had to be a wink and a nod to that. But whatever the case may be, I just thought that was something else interesting. But, yeah, I'm so curious where they're going to end up taking all of this in the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.